Hello, world. Welcome to another one of these live Q&A chats with engineers who hopefully have all of the answers to all of the questions. So the topic today is closing up the Mad Skills series that we've had on Kotlin, specifically Kotlin around the Jetpack APIs. So we've had a few episodes explaining a few things, how they work, and now we're going to hopefully answer some of your questions on this stuff more in detail. I'm Chet Haase. I'm on the developer relations team.
I'm Florina Muntenescu. I'm also in the developer relations team and working usually on architecture and Jetpack.
Hi everyone, I'm Manuel. I'm also part of the developer relations team, and I'm focused on Kotlin and Coroutines, as well as dependency injection with Hilt and Jetpack Compose.
Hey everyone, I'm David. I'm a product manager, and I look after the Kotlin developer experience in Android Studio and in Jetpack.
Hi everyone, I'm Yigit. I work on the Jetpack team on various Jetpack libraries.
Awesome. So probably some ground rules just to make sure everything makes sense today. We tend to not really talk about futures. So if you're asking a question where you're asking, when things are going to happen or what's going on in the future, chances are we'll probably just skip the question or not say anything terribly interesting about it. We're also going to try to stay on topic. Android is really, really broad, huge surface area. We are going to try to stick mostly to Kotlin with respect to Jetpack APIs, probably not so much, general language stuff and not, platform details about Android. And also, frankly, you're going to ask more questions than we can answer in the time allotted. But having said that, why don't we dive in so we can actually get to the topic of today's conversation. So first of all, why don't we ask David, how is the Kotlin first thing going? More specifically, so we declared Kotlin first, at the last I/O that we had a year and a half ago. We're doing more and more in Kotlin. How are people adopting it? How do we feel about the adoption and uptake and development of all things Kotlin these days?
Yeah, so the short answer is that it's been going really well. So we have, I think, about now 70% of the top 1,000 apps are using Kotlin now, which is really exciting and happened really quickly. The other cool thing to see in the community is just how many open source libraries are going Kotlin first, like adopting Kotlin extensions, or even writing new versions of the library in Kotlin with APIs that are a lot more Kotlin friendly. The last thing I'll say on this is, I think when we first started seeing people using Kotlin on Android before we were Kotlin first, we often heard people adopting it because of features like null safety or its conciseness or expressiveness. And what's been neat to see over the last year is more people lean into some of the more advanced features in the language as a reason to learn it. So like really big example here is Coroutines and Flow. That a lot of people are kind of adopting Kotlin because it has these really nice concurrency primitives. And so on the Jetpack team, we've really been responding to that and trying to incorporate Coroutines and Flow into those sort of relevant Jetpack libraries.
All right. Because you did such a great job answering that one, I'm going to toss another one at you. Someone asked on YouTube, so some of these questions are coming from a combination of people that asked on Twitter when we asked for things to ask, but also comments on the YouTube videos that were posted as part of the Mad Skills series, and also as part of the live chat. So we'll be dipping into all of these as we go. One of the questions that came up on the YouTube videos was, do you suggest using Kotlin DSL and build source module for Gradle as well?
The short answer is yes. So the kind of classic way to configure your build was using Groovy. That's very well documented on developer.android.com. But recently, we've been adding some more documentation for both build source and for using the Kotlin Gradle DSL. So we recently released this set of Gradle recipes that kind of shows how to do it all three ways in Groovy using build source and the Kotlin Gradle DSL. We also have kind of new APIs for the Android Gradle plugin that offer kind of Kotlin DSL specific support. So I'd encourage you to check those out. And I know that we're kind of not sort of at parity with documentation everywhere in terms of showing you how to do things in both Groovy and in Kotlin, but we are kind of working on that and kind of want to get there. Historically, I think the Kotlin support in Gradle kind of incurred this sort of build performance penalty. But it's gotten a lot better in recent versions of Gradle. And so we're pretty excited about it as like the future of configuring your build, and hope to see more people using it.
I figured under documenting was just because we know that developers like puzzles. And so we just wanted to make it, a little tricky, kind of a mystery how to make everything work when you're actually using Kotlin. So that's not the case. We're actually going to document that more.
Yeah, we don't have like a scavenger hunt theme yet in the Gradle docs, although that is a good idea.
That sounds fun. Yeah. All right. Change in topics here. Someone asked on the YouTube videos, can we use WorkManager to update a widget by getting data from the network? I don't know, Yigit or Florina?
To be honest, I haven't used widgets in a couple of years, so I'm just gonna throw it under the bus and let him answer the question.
I will lift the bus. The short answer is yes. So WorkManager is really good for the kind of like periodic work you would like to do, where like once in a while you want to fetch the weather information and notify your content providers to update the widget. So yes, you can use WorkManager to do periodic work.
So when Yigit said the short answer was, it really was a short answer. So we reached out to the engineering team just to sort of sanity check what we thought here. And the only word we got back from the engineering team was yes. So that was actually not just the short answer, but the complete answer, yes. So thanks for the question. Moving on, I'm gonna dip into some of the live chat questions that we've been getting. First one, I love this one. Will Google abolish the Java language in Android? David, you want to take a run at this one?
Sure. So the short answer is no. I think the future of Kotlin and the future of Java are really closely tied together. And I think what's been cool to see, but we don't have as much fanfare around as maybe we do with Kotlin, is that the Java toolchain's actually been making a lot of strides forward in the last year. So last year, we released core library desugaring, I think with AGP 4.0, and that brought like hundreds of new Java APIs to developers who are targeting all versions of Android. Like the really big ask there, I think, was the Java time APIs, which were only available on newer platform versions. And then the other kind of piece of news there is, I think in AGP 7.0, in the sort of preview release, we just announced support for Java 11 language features. So we're definitely making a lot of strides on the Java toolchain, and we have a long-term commitment to it, in addition to Kotlin and C++. So, not going away.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get sort of a misconstrued notion of what's happening with languages if you're comparing them language development, because the Java programming language is really mature. It's been out there for a very long time. It has a lot of capabilities. The other language we're talking about is fairly new. And so the strides that we're going to make in that space, we, as well as JetBrains, as well as the community and libraries, are going to be much larger proportionally, right? So we're seeing a lot of activity there because that language is still spinning up on some of the fundamentals as it really takes hold. Right, but in the meantime, we're still obviously developing and enhancing our support for the Java programming language and the libraries and features around that, and also the platform is still built on it. There are no plans to take all of those millions of lines of platform code and convert that to some other language. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So yeah, Java is here to stay.
I mean, just a small addition there. So we've been moving some of the Jetpack libraries to Kotlin. Like you've seen this with paging 3, where we rewrote the library in Kotlin because there was a really good benefit of using coroutines there. But even then, we create these wrapper APIs that you can use paging from Java without knowing that it was implemented in Kotlin. So we'll keep doing that. If a library moves to Kotlin, like the same way for Java libraries, we create -KTX artifacts. For libraries that are implemented in Kotlin, we'll create the RxJava wrappers or Guava wrappers where necessary to make sure you can use them from Java easily.
All right, next question from the live chat on YouTube was, what's the best way to learn this? Now, there's a lot of ways we could interpret the word this. We're going to interpret this maybe as Kotlin.
I can try to take that. If this refers to Kotlin, I would say, there are so many ways. Start with our collabs. So for example, if you already are familiar with Java, we have a collab that shows you how to go from Java to Kotlin and make your code a little bit more idiomatic, go beyond what the autoconverter does. But then also, if you want to get started with coroutines, we have a code lab. Actually, I think on developer.enter.com/Kotlin, we have a list of resources for different levels of developers. So depending on whether you're new to development or new to Android, or you're already familiar with Android, but you just want to learn Kotlin. So I would say check out our resources. And I think we can also add this in the description afterwards, right? After the chat, after the live Q&A.
Yeah, we can add links to the YouTube video that gets posted, the recording of this. Yep. So we'll hopefully do that.
Can I interpret this differently?
Yes.
If this refers to Jetpack and Kotlin, I would say that we also have code labs and documentation for that. So in general, our Jetpack documentation tends to have code snippets that are both in Java and Kotlin. And then for stuff like Room or WorkManager APIs, you'll also see specific sections that cover how to use coroutines and Room, or coroutines and WorkManager. And then similarly, we also have a code labs like the Room with a View code lab that teaches you how to use Kotlin with some of the, let's say, most popular Jetpack libraries like view models, LiveData, Room, and so on.
Okay. And then if I can do a third interpretation of the word this, if you mean what's the best way to learn how to do a live chat on YouTube, I think you're doing a fantastic job so far. That totally worked. So you can move on to the next lesson then. All right, one more question from the live stream, and then we'll dip back into some of the questions people asked before. How to use custom scoped Dagger modules in Hilt. Manuel, you want to take a run at that?
Yeah, sure. I think this question is probably asked in the context of a migration from Dagger to Hilt. And I would say that first, check if that scope maps to a predefined Hilt component. So for example, if you have a custom scope for activities, then probably you're asking to, or you want to install that module in the activity component. But if that's not the case, if the component is not available in Hilt, then you can also create your own component and add it to the Hilt hierarchy. So for that, we have a lot of resources. So we have documentation, we have a blog post about it, and also that's done in one of the code labs. So yeah, go ahead and do that.
All right. So I'm going to pop back to one of the questions that was asked on one of the YouTube videos. Specifically, Florina, this was your video on WorkManager. The question was, your Mad Skills WorkManager video was a short introduction. Any plans for more detailed videos or an article? And then there was a follow-up on that, maybe a more in-depth look into the details on how to configure the work for WorkManager, and perhaps also an example on how to use Coroutine Worker.
Yes, yes. Yes, to all of the above in terms of plans, actually. So if you want to learn more about WorkManager, especially around configuring, there's a basic code lab, basic WorkManager code lab that actually goes through all of that. That's also the code lab that I use as a basis for the video. And there we go much more in depth with what it means to use WorkManager. And we also have an advanced WorkManager code lab that goes even more in depth in terms of configuration. And I think if we can share a spoiler that we're also planning a WorkManager Mad series.
Okay, yeah, so, it'll just be between us, okay? So this isn't for public consumption, but just for the people who happen to be tuning in now and watching the recording. Yes.
So I would say stay tuned on the future episodes of Mad Skills.
Yes, excellent plug there. All right, speaking of WorkManager, next question, can WorkManager be used for immediate tasks? Yigit, I'll toss this to you. There was an elaboration on there. Apparently our documentation might be a little bit out of date. I can't personally believe that. I've never seen that happen on our developer site. The documentation says WorkManager is intended for work that is deferrable, that is not required to run immediately. And apparently the developer used it for immediate tasks and it seemed to work fine, but then backed off because the documentation was leading them maybe astray?
Yeah, backing off the right move is the right move there. So the idea with WorkManager is that you have some important task that needs to run, but it doesn't need to run right now. And that like it might have some conditions like being connected to the wireless network or like having the phone charge, whatnot, or like is like sending an email that it is important work and it needs to run. The reason why we say don't use WorkManager for immediate tasks is that let's say you just want to, do something on a background thread just to like make a request to get some data from your API or write some file to database. There is no reason to run it through WorkManager because if you run it through WorkManager, there's a lot of overhead where like we need to communicate to the system, register a job for it. All of this is unnecessary. On top of that, WorkManager takes the liberty to not run it depending on the circumstances, like all the constraints on the job. So there's no guarantee, and it will have a significant delay before it can start compared to like enqueue it on a background thread. So that's the reason. Like if the task itself like is very clearly not a replacement for something like coroutines or RxJava. They're different technologies. When you have a coroutine, your process dies, that coroutine dies. If you have a WorkManager job, your process dies, we keep it, and next time your application starts, we will run it. Or like say you said, oh, I want to run this job when there's network availability, even if your application is already stopped by the operating system, when the device connects to the network, we will wake up your application and run that job. So they're focused on different things. That's where the deferrable idea comes. Like we may not run it now, but we want to run it later. So using it for immediate tasks, yes, it will work, but it is inefficient and you don't gain anything from doing that.
Yeah, I think we kind of see this kind of question come up quite often, like, hey, the difference between coroutines and WorkManager or RxJava and WorkManager. And in the end, both coroutines and RxJava are things that you can use under the hood together with WorkManager. So for example, WorkManager has the coroutine worker that allows you to call other suspend functions and do other coroutines work in your worker. Or I think we have the Rx worker that allows you to work with RxJava and WorkManager. So it's not a replacement, but it's something that you could use together.
All right. So the next question came from a Twitter thread, and it disobeys that constraint where it asks about future development, but we're going to allow this just this one time. It is, when can we expect Coroutines Flow support in DataBinding? Manuel?
Yeah, so we added support for stateflow in the latest release, in the latest canary that was released in the beginning of January this year. So you can right now use it. But the caveat here is that it's stateflow, it's not a generic flow. And the problem there is because a generic flow, it's not an observable data holder. And for that, like a DataBinding needs to hold a value in order to show it on the screen. And so the kind of the workaround, if you want to have a regular flow there, is to convert it to stateflow because there are operators to do that. And that's pretty much it. So if you're looking for that, check the latest canary, it will be there.
Awesome. Okay, speaking of stateflow, I'm going to grab a question from the live chat. Do you guys have any recommendation on how to architect our apps with ShareFlow and stateflow? Sample project might be helpful too. Manuel, Florina?
Yeah, I can take that. So the recommendation, we're actually working on a guide to reflect these kind of architecture choices. And the thing is that we have documentation for shared flow and stateflow. And the main idea here is that you would use stateflow whenever you use LiveData right now. So it's pretty close to the UI layer, to the view in that case. So you could have it in the view model to push state updates to your UI. Then shared flow, because of the nature of it, it's kind of more generic than stateflow, can be used in the lower layers of your hierarchy as well, depending on the necessities of your application. So it's basically, you can think about it as a broadcast way of sending information to other parts of your application. And we are planning on working on these architectural guides, but right now you can use our documentation. Obviously, Jet brings documentation as well. It's pretty good.
All right. And here's an interesting one, maybe for Manuel as well. Can we know how coroutines work internally?
So we had an episode, a Kotlin vocabulary episode about this, and we also had like few blog posts for that. Basically, like I would recommend reading that content, but mainly basically everything compiles down to state machine. And because of that, coroutines can suspend their work instead of blocking the thread.
Yeah, so check those out. Really interesting technical details. I'm not sure you need to know that, but it's always interesting to know how things actually work internally. Next question from the live chat. When will Jetpack give direct support for native APIs as an SDK? It's one of those future-based questions, but I think we can answer this. You want to take it, Ron?
Yeah, we don't really have that planned. That being said, we have recently released the Games SDK under Jetpack, and that does have a bunch of native APIs. So if there's a legit use case like games, we will provide it. But if you're expecting, let's say, a can access room through native code, we have no plans to do that.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, there are different kinds of applications we expect to target those different languages and approaches to apps. And from the beginning, the Java programming language and now Kotlin is the way that you write sort of the broad apps for the ecosystem of Android. And if you're writing games or something that for some specific reason, need native languages and support, typically those kind of applications are being ported from other platforms, and maybe it's easier and more straightforward to do. Then that makes sense. But otherwise, it was never the intention to provide a single platform across all of these languages. So I think that extends into the Jetpack world as well. All right, here's another question from the live chat. Creating private mutable live data, then live data for sending a single event from view model to view seems cluttered when having 5+ events. What's a better way? Florina, you want to take a run?
Events. I think I was, when I first saw the question, I was thinking more about state, like how do you expose state? And then I would have recommended to try to use one live data to encapsulate the state of your screen. When it comes to events, I think it depends on the events. You might need to have multiple live data exposed. If, I don't know, one is for showing a toast and one is for navigating to a different screen. Yeah, do you have a better answer to this for events?
I mean, so maybe they have seen this single live event class that was created in one of our samples, which we do not want to merge before anybody asks. The idea about live data or same state flow, they're observable data holders. So they represent a state at a given time. And events don't match this. That being said, you can model events as state. So basically, when an event happens, is the state of having a pending event. And then if something handles that event, like showing a toast or navigating the user, they can change the state to not having an event. And this is necessary while developing UIs. Modeling your UI as state is necessary because at a given time, you need to be able to represent that UI. Or let's say, the case about Android, when your activity gets recreated, you need to be able to recover your state and be in that the same screen, basically. This is why we recommend people to use things like stateflow or live data to represent the state and model everything else as state so that your application behaves consistent.
Right. Speaking of stateflow, someone wants to know how stateflow works under the hood. Maybe this is a feature request for the Kotlin vocabulary series, or do we have anything out there that explains this already?
I don't know, maybe. I'd say probably read the source code. I mean, there is just, as I was saying before, the stateflow is basically built on top of shared flow. And shared flow, you can think of it as if you follow coroutines from a long time, it's pretty much a broadcast channel where it's gonna send events down there. But the thing with stateflow is that it has some unique features that make it stateflow. Like, for example, it's gonna conflate the different values, etc. But I wouldn't worry that much about it. As soon as it fits your needs, use it.
Okay, you gave my favorite answer, quote from textbooks, which is, it's left as an exercise to the reader. specifically the reader of the source code. So
one other reader exercise I would recommend is we have newer docs, actually thanks to Manuel, on developer.android.com/Kotlin, specifically on flow and stateflow and shared flow. Not necessarily how the internals work, but if you are interested in using them, definitely encourage you to take a look because they're kind of more Android specific than what you see in the general flow docs.
All right. Now we have a question. This is, I don't know if it's more developers' favorite question to ask or our favorite question to not get, which is about architecture and which architecture is more appropriate for application developers. So with Jetpack Compose, going ahead, which is preferable architecture, MVI or MVVM? Anybody have an opinion on this?
Try to answer this one.
All right.
I think in general, you should use a unidirectional pattern. So where you have the state flowing down, so from your view model to your UI, and then events going up from the UI to the view model. I think that's, I don't know, quite general, and that's something that should fit in a lot of apps. I think this brings a lot of benefits, so it's easier to test. Things end up being quite separated, so you know that you're encapsulating your state in that observable that's exposed from the view model. You only have one source of truth for the UI because the view model is just that source of truth for whatever gets displayed in the UI. So unidirectional data flow would be the TLDR.
So for unidirectional data flow, we need an acronym for that real soon.
UDF.
For UDF, I couldn't work it out fast enough in my little brain. The best explanation, or maybe the first explanation I saw, that was in a talk that I think Tim and Sean McQuillan gave at 360 NDev. So I know that there's a recording of that if you want to get kind of a nice overview for what Florina is talking about. I don't know if it's in our docs or a guide anywhere.
It will come. So we're planning, I think Manuel was saying earlier that we're planning on expanding our guide to app architecture, and it will also cover this kind of pattern.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
But just a quick addition there, like honestly, it's not that much different than what we told you to do before. Like, you just put everything into view model and your UI observer. So it always goes from your view model where you have your state or data to your UI. If you look at all these architectures, they're more or less the same. Like there's a tiny bit details between them. And my recommendation is whichever one you understand better, just use it. Like because if you understand it and you try to use it, and if it doesn't work for your use case, you'll be able to modify it to retrofit it. Like there's no one perfect architecture that fits for all applications. It really, really depends on your use case. So start with whatever you know the best or whichever looks easier to you. And as you go along, like just morph it to your needs. One mistake I see people make is that like they hit a use case where the architecture doesn't handle it very well. And they're like, oh, I must be doing something wrong. Like, you're not necessarily doing something wrong. Maybe the architecture is not optimized for that. So feel free to take the liberty to morph it to your application needs.
It sounds very controversial that all of these things are basically the same. That's like saying religions are all basically the same thing. And I think we're very close to religion with architecture anyway. People feel very, very deeply and strongly about this stuff. So I don't know, I think you've crossed a line there.
Oh, sorry.
We'll fix this in post. We'll just completely take out that thing and avoid all the fights that are going to happen. All right, someone wants to know about accessibility with Jetpack. It's sort of a broad topic and question. I'm not sure if they're asking whether there is like a Jetpack specific accessibility library, which I don't believe there is. My take is, well, it uses the platform accessibility capabilities that we already have, and all of this stuff builds on top of it. Maybe they left off the word compose and they want to know how accessibility is going to work in the new world for UI toolkits. I don't know if anybody has any. I'm also not sure that we have the right panel of guests to address this, but if anybody has any opinions on it.
Yeah, I can talk about compose, for example. So we are, for example, working on it at the moment. So we are looking forward to the next release containing not net release, a major release, like we're talking about either going to beta or Compose 1.0 in the future. Basically, we want to make all our apps accessible and make it easier to be accessible with Compose. So that's something we are working on that, both in the engineering side, but also from the dev role side about creating documentation, potentially code labs, and making it easier and easier for people to make accessible apps. That is very important for the world.
Yeah. Also for like all the existing Android views, so to look at the old system, they come with accessibility, and maybe write a component in Jetpack. We also spend a lot of time to make sure they're accessible. Like I spent countless hours to make Recycle View accessible. So like anything you use out of the box should have decent support, and if not, is a bug. Also, all of these libraries are used in Google Apps, which have a very, very strict accessibility requirements. So there's no way that we can have like suboptimal accessibility experience in Android apps. We wouldn't be able to ship anything from Google.
That would be very sad. All right, please explain Jetpack with coroutines. So Manuel, I know that one of the episodes that you did in the most recent series on Kotlin and Jetpack APIs was specifically that. Are there other resources people should look to?
Yeah, I would say like coroutines is pretty much in every Jetpack library that we have. So as Florina was saying before, go check out the code labs. You will know how to use coroutines for that particular library. But yeah, my episode was specifically in case you have your own library or you find a library that doesn't support coroutines, how to actually make it coroutines friendly with your own adapters. So if you're interested and that's your use case, go check out that episode. It's pretty interesting.
All right, great. And someone lobbed a softball at us. Please convince me for using Jetpack Compose. David, do you want to dive into that one?
Yeah, we don't say anything about this ever. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's actually a good question. Compose is in alpha right now. And so I think now is really the time for people to start testing it out, giving feedback on the APIs. And where Compose really came from was, Jetpack, I think the goal of it is to really provide a set of compatibility libraries that make Android development easier across different platform versions. And the goal of Compose in the context of that is to really solve that for UI. And the pairing of that with like Kotlin and being able to use like a Kotlin style DSL to create like a declarative way to write UI, I think is really exciting. And so we're just getting, I think, really positive feedback on the way that it makes your code sort of more concise and like fun to sort of write UI. The other thing I'd say that is neat about Jetpack Compose is it's not just the APIs, but there's a ton of really good integration with Android Studio. So things like the live preview, for example, for previewing composables. And so it's just like a really nice experience, and you're going to continue to see that get better over the next few studio releases. And so we definitely encourage you to try it out if you haven't yet.
All right. Yeah, just to add a little bit on top of this is that we strongly know that Jetpack Compose is going to be the future of Android development, because that there is so much investment going into it and there are a lot of people involved. And because it's the future and now it's in alpha, you can shape it. If you use Compose now, you can file bugs and you can try to, make and fix all the things that you think that we should do better. And so now it's the chance of filing bugs, trying to improve the APIs, because otherwise, whenever it hits beta or 1.0, it's going to be more difficult to make those changes. So we are still in alpha, so please use it and file bugs, because we are going to really appreciate that.
Cool. So we reinterpreted the question to mean, please convince me for using Jetpack Compose now. So excellent. All right, Florina, I was going to toss it, Florina. Maybe, is there a recommended approach to inserting one-to-many relationship in Room? Florina, I thought I remembered an article from you on that, but either one of you want to take this?
I'll let Eat take it.
Okay. So this is the case where, I think Florina had some articles on reading relationships, and Room has some decent support for, reading a user with a list of their friends, whatnot. But you cannot insert it back because you can only insert things that match the actual tables in the database. we do have a bug for it. We even wanted to implement it, but it gets really complicated with all the foreign keys, whatnot. What you can do, meanwhile, is that when you have a DAO method with second insert annotation, you can actually put it multiple parameters, and those parameters don't have to be the same type. So let's say you have a class of user that has a list of pets, and then you want to insert this together. What you can do is you create one insert annotated method in your DAO, pass the user as an argument, and then pass the list of pets as an argument, and we will insert all of it in one transaction. So that's what we have for right now. It's not the same as being able to insert a large relationship object, but also like wrapping these relationships is a controversial topic because there's a bunch of performance concerns. So we're not too eager to expand it too much anyways. And this is a like solid solution without any penalties, aside from writing more code. Who cares?
But that's what we want to do, isn't it? Okay, thanks. So sanity check here for people on the live stream. I think we have way more questions already than we're going to ask. So feel free to ask questions, but honestly, we're not going to get to things that end up at the end of the list because we've got a lot of great questions to try to get through most of as it is. I'm going to pop back to some of the questions we got from Twitter. Someone asked me, convinced why I should stick with Room. And the specifics around that are that they're considering migrating from, apparently they have a Room implementation right now, to SQLite on the basis of the latter supports KMP, which could be useful later when they add support to their app for other platforms. Yigit or Florina, KMP, anything?
Okay, I'll take it. There's nothing wrong with SQLite, first of all. So if you like want to use it and you already are on like multi-platform, is okay. That will make me sad, but you know there's nothing wrong with that. Keep in mind, like Room has incredible adoption. I think like more than half of the top 1,000 apps use Room. So it's like it's a very widely used library, and we get this demand that we want to meet developers where they are. So we're definitely considering Kotlin multi-platform, but it is a large task. So it will take time if we get to do that. But like, for instance, one of the blocking things for Room to support multi-platform is that there's no easy way to run annotation processors on Kotlin multi-platform code, except the tools team has been working on this thing called Kotlin symbol processing, which is the annotation processing equivalent of KPT, like specifically written for Kotlin. And in a couple of weeks or months, we are going to start supporting KSP in Room. That means you can natively run Room on the Kotlin compilation, which also results in much faster compilation times. But it's just only one step. Then we also need to generate Kotlin code and need to move Room to Kotlin. So there's a lot of work. We are definitely looking into it. So if you are today trying to move your application to Kotlin multi-platform, you will have to migrate the SQLite. But if you're only doing it for the feature, just wait for it. And I promise for the future, can we cut this part out as well, Chet?
Sure. Yeah, all things are possible. Yeah. This totally isn't going out on a live stream. Yep. All right. So here's a question from one of the YouTube videos for the series. But we've had this question a lot as people look into all the different things that we're developing. Someone asked, is LiveData going to be deprecated? Yeet again, maybe?
No. That being said, if you are on Kotlin already and already using Coroutines, we are actively making sure that like stateflow and shared flow, those are the cases where you would use LiveData, have good support and integrates very well with lifecycles, so that you don't have to use LiveData. But still, like going back to one of the earlier questions about Java programming language, if you're on Java, you cannot use Coroutines. So we'll keep supporting LiveData the same way we do today. It's just that if you're in Kotlin Coroutines, there's not really any reason to use LiveData. And if there is, we will keep addressing them.
All right. How about one for Florina? What type of data should I expose from lower layers of my architecture? LiveData?
I would probably use LiveData only on the UI layer side, so only between the view model and the UI. And then until the view model, if you're using Kotlin, then I would say just use Coroutines or Flow. If you're still using Java, then the problem with LiveData is that when you're observing values, you're observing on the main thread. So this means that if you're trying to do something, I don't know, in your repository, the LiveData is connected to a life cycle. So if you need to do an action somewhere that's not in a life cycle aware component, things end up being trickier. You would have to observe the LiveData maybe forever. The result always gets back to you on the main thread. So then you will still need to do something to maybe run that computation on a background thread. So because of all of that, I would say avoid LiveData on the lower levels, lower layers of your application, and then try to use something else, whatever other way you to move work on the background thread. If you use threads directly, or maybe other libraries like RxJava or callbacks for, I don't know, updating things. But yeah, that would still be together with some threading API. Yeah, that would be my TLDR.
All right, I'm going to pop back to the live chat. I'm going to start ripping through a couple more quickly. We're going to end this up pretty soon. Someone asked, this is sort of a follow-up to the live data deprecation question. Is LiveData deprecated for stateflow? Manuel, maybe, or Yigit?
As the same answer, if you are in Kotlin coroutines, you prefer using stateflow, and otherwise, no, it's not deprecated.
Okay. Please explain how to use common API handler with MVVM. There's one of those architecture terms again. They love it. Flow and LiveData. Is this a Yigit question, maybe?
I don't know if I understand the question.
Okay, we can move on.
Maybe like Florina or Manuel has like what does it mean to have
common API handler?
API?
Yeah.
I don't understand it either.
Is that maybe callbacks or the handler API, you know, the handler class?
Oh, you mean the handler?
I don't know.
I think we're generating questions, not answers, so I'm going to move on here. About Hilt, is it recommended over Coin? As Coin is Kotlin first, what criteria can we take into consideration when deciding which one to use? Maybe Manuel?
Yeah, I can talk about this. I mean, it's our recommendation. That means that we recommend you to use it because it's what we use internally and it's been working great so far for us. Doesn't mean that you cannot use other alternatives. And usually when we talk about Hilt versus other solutions, that we really try to, you know, talk about the strengths of Hilt. Like, for example, you have like safety compilation time where you're not gonna see pretty much any crashes in production because it's everything done at compile time. Obviously, because that overhead happens at compilation, your app is gonna run faster on execution time. And also, like, we have pretty good integrations with Android Studio. So, for example, now you can easily navigate where your dependencies are coming from, etc. And we're gonna keep improving that support. So use it if it fits your needs, as I was saying before. And obviously, we recommend it because it's the perfect tools for us. It might not be the perfect tool for you.
Okay, there's a couple of follow-ups on Hilt, pretty closely related. Dagger 2 to Hilt, smooth transition is possible? Again, Manuel?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a pretty comprehensive guide about migrating from Dagger to Hilt, and we explain everything that you need to know. It's quite straightforward, depending on how Dagger is structured in your app, but it shouldn't take that much of your time. We also have an interoperability in place, so you can use Hilt and Dagger at the same time, just to migrate at your own pace and feature by feature, however you want to do it.
Great. Sorry, go ahead.
So you end up deleting a lot of code, though, so that might feel a little bit uncomfortable. It is working as intended.
If you'd like, you could just leave it commented out, and then, you're still bulked up in terms of line count and, productivity for performance reviews and stuff like that. So do whatever works for you. Let's see. So related, are coroutines and Hilt safe to use on production, or is it better to stick with RxJava and Dagger 2 for now? There's a question on the live chat, but we've had this a lot before because Hilt is currently in alpha, and yet we're recommending that people use that.
Yeah, that's true for Hilt. And that's because even though it's in alpha, that's because there are some major changes that we want to make before reaching stable. And some of those changes are coming really soon. One is assisted injection, but there are some other nuances, like, for example, Hilt and navigation. So they are not really unstable. They are not bugs. It's just improvements that we want to make to the library. And so we want those improvements to land before moving the library to stable. That means that if the current version of Hilt suits your needs, then use it in production because it's working great so far. And then Coroutines has been stable for a long time. Probably David can talk more about this, but there have been also great improvements in the latest version of Coroutines in 1.4. A lot of stability. We are also adding Coroutines debugging to Android Studio and IntelliJ, if I'm not wrong, David. But yeah, use it.
Yeah, the only other thing I'll add to that, because that was really comprehensive, was last year, I think we officially said that coroutines are recommended on Android as the async solution. We're also, if you are using Java, you should continue using whatever async framework you were previously using. And many of our Jetpack libraries offer RxJava APIs in addition to coroutines APIs.
One small addition on Hilt, plenty of Google apps already ship with Hilt. They've been shipping for months now, and they're shipped to millions of billions of users. So it's fairly safe to use.
Yeah, it seems like a different kind of library that we have in the Jetpack space than most of them. When we go alpha with most of the libraries, these are new libraries. We're hitting alpha. We think it's reasonable functionality, but we do expect to sort of iterate on that. I think Jetpack Compose is a great example of that. Things changed, a lot during the alpha period, whereas Hilt was an external library based on something that was already being used in production. So the fundamentals are very stable. And alpha is more an indication, as Manuel said, that things may change, like the API may change, but a lot of the fundamentals are there, and we're very happy for people to actually use it in production as it is now. All right, I am going to wind this up. We had one follow-up question. I wanted to sort of take a step back and broaden a little bit. There was one question that came in on the live chat that I'm going to sort of wrap into something that we had from Twitter as well. Someone asked on the live chat, what is the future of Jetpack? But I want to make that a little bit more specific and address a concern that someone had brought up on the Twitter thread, which was, when should we expect stable versions of different libraries? And there was a nuance to that. They said that it feels like many of the Android X libraries progress slowly. There's only a few unstable releases, and maybe some of those libraries only have a max of one stable release per year. And there's plenty of open issues going on. Are we happy with where Android X is at right now and going? And basically, what is that future? Where are we going with this stuff?
I can kickstart it. So are we happy overall? No, we would like it to be faster. That's for sure. That being said, the reason why we started having more and more long alpha cycles is that because we get feedback, then we iterate on the API. There's this problem of once we lock down API, so once a library moves from alpha to beta, we can never get rid of that API. And as people who worked on the framework for over many years, you end up regretting a lot of API. So it creates a bad taste that, okay, you just need to take it really slow. So most of our libraries, despite being in alpha, they're not unstable per se. They just we just want to be able to make sure when we lock down the APIs, they're good APIs. It's the same case for Hilt. It's very similar for paging. Very similar for data store. We're just iterating on the API so that 3 years from today, we don't regret most of it. We will regret some of it. That's just unavoidable. But that's the reason why they are in alpha. And we understand that this creates some trust problem because a similar library Compose is in alpha and is changing a lot versus Room's next version is also in alpha and it's not changing much. So it's really difficult to distinguish between the alpha of compose or alpha of room. They kind of mean different things. So this is a problem we're trying to address. So don't think that we understand this is not okay. But right now, this is the situation, and we really want to keep those feedback cycles so that like the first version of the library is good enough. If you've been developing Android for a while, you will recall that like in the old days of we had support library, a stable version of support library would come out and everybody would wait for a couple of patch bug fix releases before using it. Like we don't want to be that. We want the stable versions to be really good and usable.
Right, and it does seem highly dependent on the surface area of that thing. Like Camera X too has been in a long beta cycle because they are working on some really fundamental things and fixing a lot of really important problems in the ecosystem in camera development. And so they want to be very measured about how they fix that and come out with iterations on the API and test that really carefully before they lock that in. Right, all pretty important. Anybody else want to jump in on this one? And
I feel like it's a chicken and egg problem. While we're in alpha, we're still getting bugs, and then we can't get to stable because we find some of these bugs to be, I don't know, that critical or changing APIs that we want to make sure that we release a product that's as stable as possible. So provide feedback so we can create stable and good quality libraries.
On the other hand, if they don't file bugs, then we can release it more soon, right? Isn't that
That's what I was going to say. Is this asking for less bugs?
One other related thing I might bring up is just in terms of like pace of improvements and seeing these libraries progress faster. One cool thing I think for like the ecosystem is more of these Android X libraries now being available on GitHub for external contributors to more easily like submit pull requests. And so I think it's still early days on that to really see like that affect the overall pace of Android X development. But I do think it kind of makes it for a tighter feedback loop with the community. So definitely encourage folks to check that out.
Awesome. With that, I think we will wind this up. I want to thank the panel for your time and your considered answers. I want to thank everyone on the live chat, especially all the people that tossed in all the questions, and I want to apologize deeply for all the questions that we didn't actually get to have time for. But I hope this was helpful, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you for a future one of these. Thanks.
Thank you.